Right. Good morning. Welcome to Thursday. Welcome to Comparative Cultures 12. How's it going? Okay? Normal? All right. I'm going to say hi to some people who are here but not here. So Adon is here. Good morning, Adon. Michelle is here. Good morning, Michelle. Amanpreet is here. Hello. Hello to you again. Noah's here. Good morning. Good morning, Noah. And Sarah's here. Good morning, Sarah. So let's jump into where we were yesterday, talking about a little bit about anthropology and a little bit about culture. And the reason why I was talking about anthropology is because, again, I know it, but also, anthropologists are kind of they're the academics who are really interested in human culture. And of course, that's what we're talking about in this course. So I thought I'd introduce a little bit of anthropology and anthropology perspective to you. That's why we're talking about this stuff. So we said yesterday that anthropology was kind of the study of humans in all times and all places. And so everything about humans and what it means to be a human and who are we and where do we come from and where are we going, all of those things are questions that anthropologists are interested in, right? Both in the present and in the past. And we said that that's a lot to study, right? Humans are a lot to study. And so often we have these kind of sub-disciplines that explore either the sort of physicalness of humans, our physical body, or how we use our bodies. We have anthropologists who study culture and sort of social dynamics of humans. We have archaeology, anthropologists that study human behavior in the past. And then we have linguistic anthropology that, good morning, that studies human language, how it's built, how it works, and how we use it to transmit meaning and transmit culture, right? We also said, and this is kind of an important point, I think it's an important point, that humans are kind of interesting and unique because so much of our behavior is taught to us. We have very little in the way of biological programming to do things. And so, we can probably all think of nature documentaries that we've seen, and, little baby animals are born or hatch, and they kind of just seem to know what to do. And some animals don't even have any parental support, right? In some cases, an animal lays eggs and then the mother leaves, and when the eggs hatch, the young are all on their own in the world, and hopefully they will survive. But humans are kind of the exact opposite of that, right? We have very few young, but we make a tremendous investment in them because, of course, when humans are born, they're entirely helpless, right? And they don't know really anything, right? They have very little kind of pre-programmed into them. And so do I have that? Yeah, so I made that analogy of human brains being kind of the hardware, but culture being the software, right? And without that software downloaded, humans don't know how to do very much. They don't know how to take care of themselves. And so all of us go through a process of enculturation for, I would say, probably most or all of our lives, where we learn social behaviors and social norms. We learn information and how to do things. We come to understandings of things. All of that takes a long time to download. And in that way, we're very different from really any other animal on the planet, right? No other animal on the planet has this much investment in their young and has such a long childhood in which learning continues to occur, right? And hey, come on in. We also said that because of that, because so little of what we do and what we know is pre-programmed, we can almost think of everything we do as being cultural. So I gave the example yesterday of me brushing my teeth in the morning, and it's very, uninteresting and normal, but it's also a cultural act, right? It's part of my cultural behavior. I'm not, biologically driven to brush my teeth in the morning. I'm taught to, right? And so I do it for reasons that my culture tells me to, right? So everything we do and many of the things that we think, the perspective from which we view things, all of those things are actually cultural. And so to be human is to be a practitioner of culture, right? So I supplied you with this definition here that culture was a shared system of, or a system of shared beliefs and values and behaviors and customs and artifacts. And artifacts are just physical objects, whatever they might be. Physical object, physical object, physical object, right? And those are common to a group of people. And we said yesterday that culture has a huge number of aspects, right? And so I gave you this little graphic here, which is, a bit of a symbol of what culture can be thought of in terms of aspects of culture, but also people's kind of emotional investment with those things. And so I said often the things that we think about with culture in terms of dress and food and rituals and language and things like that, those are kind of very superficial things, but the really deep things are kind of the ones that you can't see, right? How people perceive other people, how they perceive time, how they perceive relationships and family and the nature of the universe and what happens when we die. And all of those things are important parts of culture that are harder to see, right? But certainly more important in terms of the way people kind of live their lives. We said culture was also a tool, right? It's a tool that humans use to interact with themselves and with their environment, right? And we said that it was really useful to have culture in one way and to have everyone sharing cultural beliefs and values because it's good for cooperation, right? If I think that you believe most of the same things that I believe, not exactly, but most, then it's much easier for me to trust you, right? We said that even the gesture of the handshake, and again, I don't know if this story is true, but the gesture of the handshake is one of trust, right? Look, I don't have a weapon. I'm not going to bonk you on the head with a club and steal your money or stab you with a knife. Look, my hand is open. I come here in peace, right? And so shared values help to build trust, right? And people who trust each other can cooperate with each other, right? And we said that cooperation was something we didn't name yesterday, but it was an important part of what humans are. And in fact, probably one of our most important traits is our ability to work together, to do things together and accomplish goals together. And I gave an example yesterday that here in this college we have an excellent model of cooperation because all of us are cooperating to get what we need, right? You need an education and you need credits in these courses and you need grades. And of course, I will supply them, right? And you have supplied money and that helps pay me. And we have a whole admin staff who used to be working downstairs but are now working online. But they're still working, keeping the college running, right? Paying all of our bills and keeping track of our records, making sure the lights stay on, all of that stuff. Everyone is cooperating and working together so that we all get what we need, right? And that's just a small group of people, never mind a larger corporation or even a country, right? In which millions of people can be working together to get what they need, right? Except in the United States, where apparently cooperation is so last year and they're just going to fight it out with guns or something. I don't know. Sorry. It's going to be a very interesting week next week in the history of the United States, to say the least. It will be very interesting to see what happens. Huh? Why? Because, well, their new president, Joe Biden, will be inaugurated. He'll be sworn into office, so he'll swear on a Bible. But there's a lot of people who are not supportive of that. And so there may be some protests, there may be some demonstrations, there may be violence. There what?
There are many protests.
Yes, there were, and there may be more next week, but nobody really knows what's going to happen. It's going to be must-see TV, as they used to say, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, right. So yeah, so cooperation is an important part of what humans are, and so a lot of one of the functions that culture serves is how do we function as a social unit, right? How do we get along as a group? Because we need to. We said that yesterday. We're social animals. We live in groups and we survive in groups, right? We don't do well on our own. We do well in groups, and so we have to learn how to do that. I think we kind of touched upon this yesterday, but one of the interesting things to think about with human cultures is that no matter really what time or place you go to, so any modern culture that you might go to, or even any ancient culture, if you had a time machine or one of those Avengers space-time GPS things that Tony Stark invents, if you were able to go to any culture, I think what you would find is that all societies experience a lot of the same things, right? They experience the birth of new people, new humans, right? They experience deaths. Everyone has to figure out how to find food and to eat. Everyone has to shelter themselves from the environment, although the environment they live in might be different. Everyone has to find water. Everyone has to find social safety and social security, right? These are basic human needs that every society has had to find a way to meet since the beginning of time. So, but even though we have these kind of very common experiences as humans, one interesting question might be, well, if that's true, why do we have so many different cultures, and why do we have so many different beliefs, right? Like, even if we look at what happens, when you die, okay? So the question of what happens when you die is a big one, and it's one that humans have been struggling with probably for tens of thousands of years. Why do you think we have so many different versions of what happens? Why do cultures explain? Because when a person dies, I think we can all explain that when they die, right? If you die in China, or you die in the US, or you die in Mexico, or you die in wherever, a death is a death, right? But all cultures explain that death in very different terms, and they understand it differently. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? Say that one more time. You've got your mask on and it's hard to hear you, so I apologize, but.
Because every society has different beliefs, religion.
Okay, so religious beliefs will definitely influence that, right? Because that's actually one of the functions of religion, is to explain that process and explain some of the things that are not easily observable, right? So yeah, one thing might be religion, right? That might influence the answer to that question of what happens when you die. What else?
They're like what they do. For example, if they're Vikings, they see death as like very honorable. But if they're like regular people, they're very likely to be afraid of death, so they would make up different stories about letting it go.
Yeah. So there's some different values around and feelings around death and what it means to die, right? Whether it's the end, that's it, or whether you're going on to something else, or whether you're going to Valhalla, and that changes people's perceptions of death, right? Is it a comfortable thing? Is it a joyous thing? Is it a tragic thing? Is it a frightening thing, right? All of those, there are cultural values attached to that, and so people will understand that process differently.
Even Vikings, like when they're fighting, they're afraid to get stabbed from behind. But if they get stabbed from behind and they die, the others are gonna think he was running away and he doesn't deserve to go to Valhalla.
Yeah. So there's not only explanations of death, but also the manner in which you die is important as well, right? If you fall off a ladder, it's not the same as dying gloriously in battle, right? It's there's a difference there. And so yeah, the way in which you die will influence people's perceptions of death as well, right? Did you die in a noble way, kind of thing? That makes a difference. What else do you think?
Culture.
Yes, but kind of a little bit. Okay.
Based on the history, like how they used to bury them. For example, like the old Asian Egyptians, like when a king dies, they used to put his pet around him. Like the pyramid, there's a small pyramid, that the pet was buried there, and the queen around him.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely the past history informs it, right? We tend to bury people in the way that we always have, right? And actually, it's one of those things. When we looked at the iceberg of culture before, kind of the deeper you go into culture, the more resistant to change those ideas are, right? And so, at the top is food, and so, food is always evolving, right? Cuisine is always evolving, and it's easy to change, a recipe or change the way you make something, and it's not a big deal. But how you bury the dead, how you treat the dead, is not something that you change all the time, right? So, if your parents were, buried in a cemetery, and their parents were, you're not all of a sudden going to decide to do something totally different with, the body of your parents or something. You're going to follow tradition, right? And so kind of the more deeply held those ideas are, the more resistant to change they are as well. So yeah, you often see people doing what has always been done, because to not do so would be deeply inappropriate or religiously offensive or something like that, right? Those ideas are very deeply held. But what else do you think might influence different explanations for the same thing?
Environment.
What's that?
Environment.
Environment, okay. Can you give me a little bit more there?
It's a different place and has different customs.
Well, I think you're very right. I think that, many cultures try to explain their world based on the world that they live in, right? And so, and we'll see this in a number of cultures this term. And so I think death is no exception, right? People will, in trying to understand something that they don't understand, they will look at their environment and be inspired by it, right? The place in which you live inspires how you understand the world and how you understand things that are difficult to answer. Let me see if I can think of, okay, yeah.
Traditions change, like from the history. Like before, let's say if people used to die, like hundreds and thousands, they would just like dig a big hole and bury them all together at once, or burn them all.
In some cases, that's happened, right? If you have a large number of people dying at once, right? Maybe in a war or a battle or a pandemic or an epidemic or something, yeah, you would bury a lot of people at once, or a genocide. Yeah, you would bury a lot of people at once. So I guess the historical context makes a difference too, right? Like not only why those people died, but just what's going on, right? Is it just business as usual in your society, or is there a plague? Like is the is there an epidemic disease, or is there a war going on, and suddenly you have hundreds of dead soldiers that you have to do something with, right?
Isn't that changed now?
Isn't it changed?
Like now?
In what way?
Like, let's say, for example, burning everyone together, or burying them all together.
Burying them all together? Usually we wouldn't do that because, well, this is another actually interesting anthropological question, is when you die, okay, who does your body belong to? Ah, interesting. What are some other answers to that question? God might be one answer. Nature, right? In terms of your body will return to the natural world in one way or the other, right? Who else might your body belong to? Okay, but who makes decisions about what is now done with it? Okay, so it might belong to your family, right? They might do something with your body, bury you or cremate you, or this is an archaeological term, but dispose of your body in some way, because of course we have to do something with these dead people.
Or like, if you could make that decision yourself, like say you want to donate your body for science.
Right, so the decision of what to do with your body might be depending on culture and society, it might have to do with, or it might fall to different people. The reason I was kind of bringing this up is I was thinking of those U.S., what are they called? Military cemeteries. Have you ever seen them, like in a movie or TV? And if you go into these military ceremony or why can't I say that word? Cemeteries. If you go into a military cemetery, what do you see? You see a bunch of grave markers for all of these dead soldiers. All of the graves are exactly the same, right? The markers are all the same. If you go to a regular cemetery, you'll see all kinds of different grave markers, right? But in the military cemetery, they're all the same. They're all inscribed in the same way, and they're inscribed with the name of the dead soldier, right? And so in that way, that's interesting too, because the state, the country, has actually taken, the body belongs to them, right? So, so let's pretend I have a son and he dies in Iraq or wherever he is, and the body comes home, but the US military says, we'll be giving him a soldier's burial, right? So he doesn't get buried in the cemetery where I choose, he gets buried in the military cemetery, right? And that's different, right? That's the state, that's the country taking his body and saying, he died for us, and now he becomes one of our war heroes, or whatever you want to say. So it's not only the manner of death that people die, but then that also influences who kind of owns the body, right? Who is in charge of the body, and who gets to determine how it's treated, right? Is it going to be buried here or buried there, or is something else going to happen to it? So there's lots of different things, and that's just one aspect of culture, right? That's just dying and disposing of a body after the person is dead, right? But we said, environment is going to play a role, right? What the natural environment looks like is going to influence how a culture interprets the world, right? Historical events will definitely influence it, right? Particularly if strange events are happening, right? Like if you're in the middle of a war or an epidemic or a pandemic, that's going to change. It's not business as usual for a society. It's going to influence their culture in one way or another. Here in our current pandemic, we have our culture is changing already because nobody's shaking hands anymore, right? That's a customary thing to do in Canada here. When you meet someone, you often shake their hand, but we don't do that anymore. So it's already starting to modify our culture, and it'll be interesting to see when we come out the other side of this pandemic. It'll be interesting to see if people are eager to shake hands again, or if they're good just, not touching each other. It'll be interesting to see if those customs come back or if they will stay permanently changed.
Or touching elbows.
Yeah, or touching elbows. Will that become a new custom, or will we forget about it? We'll see. I don't know. The other thing, the way in which people acquire their food can also influence how people explain things. One example that I like to give of this is anyone familiar with the Bible, with the sort of Christian Bible, New Testament, story of Jesus and all that stuff? If you read the Bible, you often hear of Jesus referred to, sometimes God too, but often Jesus. He's referred to as a shepherd, right? Jesus is the shepherd, God is my shepherd, and his believers or his followers are sheep, right? These are his sheep. Sometimes Jesus is referred to as the Lamb of God, sometimes too. There's also a really heavy metal group called Lamb of God too, but that's a different thing. So we have these kind of names, right? So Jesus is a shepherd, he's herding his flock or his sheep. Jesus is sometimes the Lamb of God, with God as the shepherd. And that shouldn't really be surprising, because at the time that Jesus was living and the time that a lot of those Gospels were written, herding sheep was a way that people made a living, right? There was lots of shepherds in the hills of Palestine and around Jerusalem herding sheep, right? That was how they got their food, and they would eat the sheep sometimes or sell the sheep and buy things with the money. That was how people got their food and made a living. That was a very common occupation, was shepherd. And so it's probably not surprising that people who are writing the Gospels and writing the Bible would use this to understand Jesus' relationship with his followers, or Jesus' relationship with God himself, right? Because this is a very common thing. There's lots of shepherds wandering around, and Jesus is like a shepherd, but he's a shepherd of people, not of sheep, right? So again, the way that people earn a living, or the way that people get their food, that can kind of influence how they see the world too, and they can use that to explain things. You'll also see that, or you'll also maybe even just know that if you talk about pregnancy and women getting pregnant and births and things like that, there's a lot of agricultural metaphors tied up in that as well, right? Is a woman fertile, right? Just like the soil is fertile, just like the ground is fertile, and the man plants a seed, right? And the seed grows. And these are all farming, agricultural metaphors for the process of becoming pregnant and giving birth to a child, right? But people use their agricultural knowledge and experience to help explain things that they don't quite understand, like conceiving a child. So all of these things can kind of influence how people see the world, and it accounts for these kind of different cultures and different ways of seeing something that's exactly the same, right? Again, conceiving a child is, biologically the same no matter where or when you are, but the way that a culture thinks about that process is often very different, right? Okay, four characteristics of culture that we should be aware of. One, that culture is symbolic. I'll talk about each of these. One, that it's learned. We've talked about that a little bit already. One, that it's integrated. I'll talk about that. And one, that it's shared. Okay. So one of the things that we should remember about culture is that cultures are highly symbolic. Okay, what's a symbol? Yeah, it's something that represents something else, right? And so, and there's all kinds of different symbols that cultures use, right? So here's a few symbols that you might have seen before. What are some of the symbols? What do these represent? Some of the things you see up here. What do you see? Huh? What's a symbol for hope? Oh, okay, so Superman's a symbol for hope. Okay, we'll come back to him. What else do you see up here? What's that? Yeah, what kind of religions? Right, so there's let me just see what there is here. Okay, so we see the Star of David right up here, right? What's that? Okay, okay. Yeah, so the Star of David represents Judaism, right? The religion of Judaism, but also the Jewish people, right? And the Israeli state that's on their flag, of course. What about this one here? You know what that one is? What's that? I think it's kind of an Om symbol.
It's like a Bangladesh because like they have the same map, right?
Right. What is it? Yeah, I think so. I think it is, but I'm not entirely sure about that one. What about this one? What is it? It's Japan. I think it's a Shinto Shrine, and it's a Shinto symbol. This one? Yeah, that's the yin yang. That's kind of a Taoist symbol. Do you know this one? No? This one, I think, if this is what it is, it's a Greek symbol, I think, for Mother Earth, I think is what it was. And it's probably been a few other things since then, but I think that might be one meaning that it holds. This one? Yeah, it's a symbol for Muslim, for Islam. This one? Nike. Target. No, this one? No, that's a symbol for Sikhism, for Sikhs. Sikhs use this to sort of represent themselves. Yeah. Yeah, so that's Biohazard, right? I don't really know what this one is. Does anyone know this one? It does look like a lotus. Is that another Buddhist symbol as well? Is it? Yeah. Do you know what this one is? Yeah. 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 This one's a medical symbol here. So I think it comes from Greek mythology or Roman, and so it's either I think it's Hermes is the Greek messenger god, but also the god of medicine, and so he had wings on his shoes. That's what made him so quick, and so the wings are here. The snakes, I forget what the deal is with the snakes. Oh, there you go. Yeah. So, let me just see here. So we've got a Hinduism symbol here, which I'm not sure. I'm guessing it might be that one, but I'm not entirely sure if that's a symbol for Hinduism or not. Maybe Irene can let me know. Om is Hindu symbol meaning God. There we go. I'm on Preet. Okay, cool. If we go to the Superman thing, Superman is kind of that's a symbol that I think we're all familiar with. And what does it mean? Like Mulder, you said it represents hope, but what else does it represent? What's that? A person, right? So the comic book character of Superman. Yeah. What else?
Like a savior.
Yeah, a savior, right? The capacity to save others, right? To save people who are in danger or in need. What else is what's that? A hero, yeah. That meaning is encoded in that symbol as well. Heroism. What else?
Power, like extra power.
Yeah, extra power, right? Superman is super powerful, duh. he's very he's very powerful, right? So that is in the symbol as well. Anything else? I think that's probably it. There might be a little bit of like U.S. patriotism as well. I feel like the U.S. kind of sees him as like an American hero. And so, although he was partly invented by a Canadian, but that's another story. But yeah, all of these meanings are encoded in the symbol, right? Heroism and strength and power and, saving people who are in trouble, right? Maybe doing the right thing, maybe morality and ethics, right? All of those things, what it is to be a good person, all of those things are kind of encoded in the symbol. And so, not to mention the character, the comic book character. So when you see that symbol, all of that meaning is transmitted to you instantly, right? You're reminded of the comic book character or the movie character, you're reminded of him, but you're also reminded of all of those other meanings that are attached as well, right? And so culture operates like this. It's full of symbols that carry all kinds of meaning. And the symbols can be visual like this. They can be words that we say, right? Because we said every word is a symbol for a thing or an action or a concept. They can be gestures that we make, right? Those are symbols too. Right? Or all of those are symbols that communicate meaning to people. And so cultures are highly, highly symbolic, and they transmit meaning that way. And often they transmit meaning when we're not even paying attention, when we don't even know that we are interpreting those symbols and kind of absorbing them and making sense of them. Because again, our brains are very good at doing this, right? At communicating symbolically, but also at interpreting symbols. And that's exactly what's happening right now, right? I'm sitting up here making noises with my mouth, because that's my job. Sit in front of people and make noises at them. And those noises are all symbols, right? Every word I say is symbolic of something else. And you are sitting there interpreting those symbols and trying to make meaning out of them. At least I hope that's what's happening. You're trying to make meaning out of them. And that's a very important part of culture, is encoding meaning in symbols and decoding those symbols as well. Let me give you a little bit of a more concrete example here, rather than Nike logos and things like that. These people here, and we'll hear about them again, these people are the Quake people, which is kind of a funny sounding word. It sounds kind of like a duck, wah, wah, wah. But these are the Quake people, and they are an indigenous people, a group of indigenous people, a particular culture. And historically speaking, they have lived, traditionally they've lived here in British Columbia, kind of a little ways up the coast from here. And so, if my head's not too much in the way, probably is. So here's Vancouver right here, and you can see the Quake kind of home territory is up the coast a little bit, and this top part of Vancouver Island is kind of their home territory as well. Right now here we're in Coast Salish territory, so the Coast Salish people traditionally lived and still do live in this part of the province. The other thing while we're here, I thought I'd mention is prior to Europeans arriving in this part of the world, look at how many different cultures there were just in this part of British Columbia. This isn't even all of British Columbia. This is just part of it. But look how many cultures there were, right? There's the Quake up here, there's Coast Salish, there's these Okanagan groups here. There's a few that I can't pronounce, unfortunately, and can't quite read. There's these Haisla people and Tsimshian people. There are Haida people up here, Tlingit, inland Tlingit. There's the Gitxsan people and Nisga'a people up here. So often we kind of lump indigenous people into one group, right? Oh, there's indigenous people. They're one they're one culture, but really they're not. There's at least a dozen different cultures living and thriving in this part of British Columbia before Europeans. And so before Europeans come here, Canada is a very culturally diverse area. And I think there was something like 20 or so different languages spoken in British Columbia before Europeans came here. So it's a very diverse place. And so I just thought we should point out that, you know, it's important to remember that, is that Indigenous people aren't one group. They're actually a bunch of different cultures with some similarities and some common heritage, but different nonetheless. Anyway, the Kwakwaka'wakw people are just a little bit up the coast. Traditionally speaking, they used to build their villages kind of on the coast here, and they'd build these really giant houses. And you can see how big they are. Here's a guy standing right there. And so they built these really large houses out of cedar trees. And you can see this is a museum exhibit, but it's a little easier to see what's going on. And so you can see these people would have villages, and they'd have these big cedar houses that they'd paint designs on the front of. You can see some totem poles standing there, which you've probably seen around Vancouver, right? These totem poles standing there. You can see they built a bit of a seawall for themselves, and they have boats and things like that. So this was kind of a little picture into their way of life. The Kwakwaka'wakw were, as most Indigenous people were prior to contact, they were hunters and gatherers. And so that means that the way that they got their food was not by, they didn't farm, they didn't grow any crops, they didn't really keep any animals. They got their food from the natural world, right? Either fishing or hunting or gathering berries and nuts that they knew how to find, or mushrooms, things like that. That's how they made their living. Now, I bring them up here because I want to talk about a way in which their culture is symbolic. And of course, all cultures are symbolic. It's not just the Kwakwaka'wakw people, but they have what some anthropologists would call a key symbol. And for the Kwakwaka'wakw people, the key symbol is hunger, okay? Hunger is a symbol. And it sounds a little odd, but I'll explain it to you. First, though, it's interesting to look at some Kwakwaka'wakw art. And so what we're looking at here are some masks. And the Kwakwaka'wakw people are, they have very theatrical rituals. And so their rituals are often dances that occur, and the dances occur by people in costume. And so they have these robes and, you know, elaborate robes that they wear, and often a wooden like helmet or mask that they wear, and they will act out a myth or a story or a certain dance. And so it's very theatrical and very interesting to watch, which I may try and look up. I had something on that in an earlier class, and maybe I'll look it up. But here we can see a few different animals. So there's right here behind me, there's a bear. There's a bear behind me. Up here, I think that's a wolf. Nope, sorry, the wolf's over there. I think that's a wolf over there. Here, I think this might be a thunderbird, which is kind of a mythical man-eating bird, very powerful kind of thing. I think that's what it is. And over there, you can see there's a wild man. And so the Kwakwaka'wakw people have these stories about wild men of the woods and women. See, sexual equality. One of the things you might notice about these masks, they're very, again, they're very theatrical and very beautiful, I think. But on all of them, you can see there's a lot of focus or a lot of attention on the mouth and the teeth, right? All of these creatures have either big teeth being shown, right? The bear's got his teeth out, lots of teeth on the wolf. The thunderbird's got a big beak. That wild man of the woods has these big teeth. And if you look at a lot of Kwakwaka'wakw stories, you'll see a lot of eating and being eaten happening in the stories. And in fact, the story of the wild man and the wild woman of the woods is that, yeah, if little kids wander off into the woods and get lost, they will be found by the wild man and eaten. So don't wander off in the woods. So you see that kind of focus on eating and hunger being represented in the symbolism of their art. Okay. Now there's a little more to that, but maybe we'll press pause. We'll press pause on that for a minute. We'll come back to the quack walkie walk in a second. The second aspect of culture that I want to talk about is enculturation, that culture is learned. But I think before I do that, I will give you a little break, because I think we need to, I think we need a break. I don't have anything else to say about that. So take 10, come back, and then we will, we'll talk about this enculturation thing. So, we're talking about characteristics of culture, and one I said was culture is symbolic, right? We communicate with each other through a variety of symbols all day, all the time. And as we encode those symbols to other people, and we decode them as well, right? And so everything we say is a symbol. Often our hand gestures are symbols. Our clothing can be symbols as well, right? Our clothing says something about us, right? We're trying to transmit meaning about who we are to the world around us, right? So we have lots of ways of communicating with other humans symbolically. The second one, and we've talked about this a little bit, is that culture is learned. And so we have all and are all going through the process of enculturation, right? The process of learning our culture and how to sort of survive in it. Now often, oh shoot. I'll put on my microphone. Sorry, people at home. I knew something wasn't right. Often, when we're taught cultural things, cultural lessons, sometimes we're taught very directly, right? Our parents or our relatives will teach us, this is how we prepare food, right? This is how we dress. This is how we speak with our elders. This is how we treat our siblings. This is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. I think we can all probably remember instances in which we've been taught those things. But in many cases, we are taught those things a little more under the radar, a little more implicitly. And often what happens is that we're given a lesson and then our society reinforces those ideas with all kinds of different symbols around us, okay? So let me give you a little example here. Do you know what this is? Does anyone, sorry. Does anyone know how to play chess? Yeah? Yeah? Is anyone good? Okay? Okay. Is anyone watching The Queen's Gambit on Netflix? Yeah? Is it good? It's all right. Yeah, I've heard good things, but I haven't watched it yet. I'm in the middle of a Canadian show called Schitt's Creek, so I don't want to interrupt that, but maybe I'll get to it eventually. No, but I know you do. No, there's the best part of TV now, or at least streaming services. There's so much out there, but the worst part is that there's so much out there, and it's like you can never get through it all. Yeah, you can. Eventually, I'll watch everything. Right? I'll probably be retired by the time I do, but. Anyway, this is a chessboard, obviously, and some people know how to play, which is good. I know how to play a little bit, but I'm really bad. I taught my dad how to play chess, and he beat me the second game we played. So that's not good.
Yeah, dads are good.
Huh?
Dads are good. Our fathers.
Well, I prefer to look at it as I'm just such a good teacher that, yeah, that's what I'm going to say. It's not that I'm a bad chess player. I'm just a really good teacher. Anyway, he's a smart cookie though too. So here we have a chessboard, right? And it's a game, right? We know how to play it, or we've seen people play it, whatever. But to look at this game with the eyes of an anthropologist, we might see something a little different, right? We might see a lot of symbols and kind of cultural lessons encoded in the game in a way that makes sense to people, right? So first of all, we've got, well, I'll get to that in a second, but you're very right. So we've got kind of two, what do we see when we look at this game? We've got a board, right? We've got some squares that are kind of checkered, and we've got a bunch of pieces, one on one side and one on the other, right? And what kind of, how is this game played? Well, basically the two sides, I'm going to try and get this on camera here. It's a war, basically. The two armies, if you will, march toward each other and do battle, right? And of course, in a real battle, it happens fast, right? We've seen it in movies and television where they line up and then they charge at each other and they hack each other to death until somebody wins somehow. We've kind of seen how, what's that? Or they killed the king, right? So we kind of know how these battles go, right? And so this is kind of a symbolic war of old times, right? But of course it happens in slow motion, if you will, right? And so you kind of move your pieces and hopefully defeat your enemy, right? So the first thing an anthropologist might notice is that, yeah, this is kind of a metaphor for warfare.
I don't know if it's true, like I've heard it before. They used to use the chess as a plan on how to go to war.
You know, I could see it developing from that. Like I can see you having like a board and pieces and like moving them around to show how you're going to move your armies. I could see it developing from that. I don't know if that's how it did, but I could imagine that. Yeah. So this is a game of war, right? And so maybe this tells the anthropologist that, oh, warfare is valued or not a horrible thing for this culture to have, or maybe just a regular thing. Warfare is something that happens in this culture and that something people identify with. Now, how do you win? How does this game end? You have to. You have to defeat the king. And how do you do that? You have to corner him, right? And what's that called? Checkmate, right? So you kind of get your pieces in toward the other player's king, either by taking the other player's pieces or just by maneuvering your way in there, or a little bit of both usually. And you get the position, you get the king in a position where he cannot move. And once you have that, you say checkmate, and then you've won, right? You've won the game. What's that? You are victorious, right? And so that's interesting too, because that is the purpose of this game, no? The purpose is to win. So this game has a winner and this game has a loser. Are there any ties in chess? You can have a draw. Probably not that common though, right? Yeah. Can we say more often than not somebody wins and somebody loses? Yeah. Yeah, more often than not somebody wins, somebody loses. And not only that, if you play chess, you're trying to win, yes? Yeah, you're trying to win the game. So, but that's another thing too, is that there's a value to winning, right? Winning is a cultural value in this case. And it's not universal. There are things that people do, and there are games that people play in our culture and in others, in which winning is not the some cultures play like a game of football, for instance, and the game is over when the elders of the community feel that the score is tied. When they feel the score is tied, then the game is over. So in that culture, in that situation, winning is not the value, right? The value is cooperation and experience and equality, not victory over your rivals, right? That's not the value. So here we have a value of winning kind of baked into the game. The other thing an anthropologist might notice is that there's obviously a bunch of different shaped pieces here. I was about to say pizzas. I think I'm getting hungry. There's a bunch of different pieces here on the board. And so what do we have here for pieces? So there on the back row here, there's a there's a rook, right? Or depending, some places it's, some places in the world it's different, right?
It's the castle.
Yeah, a castle or a rook. I think in India, I think it's an elephant, I've been told.
No, the elephant is the.
That's the elephant? Is this always a castle? Oh, okay. So there's a castle or a rook or something here. What's this? The horse or the knight. This here, the elephant, or in this case, it's a bishop with a Christian sort of influence, right? Here we have there's the king. Here we have the queen.
But like normally they say it's not the king, it's not the queen, it's like the president after the president.
Oh, like the prime minister?
Yeah.
Oh, very interesting. So there's a king and a...
It's different between like some say it's like the minister and some they say it's the queen.
Very, very interesting. So,
Because it's a war, like the queen won will fight.
right. So we've got, so interesting that these two, maybe heads of state, if we can call them, they vary depending on time and place, right? King and queen, I think, is the traditional one that at least I'm familiar with. But yeah, sometimes it might be a president and prime minister, or a king and a prime minister or something, depending on where and when you are. It's very interesting. And what about these little guys here?
They're the soldiers.
Right, they're the soldiers. So these pieces move differently, yes? Okay. So how do the soldiers move here, or the pawns, if you will? Yeah, the first time they move, they can move 2 squares. After that, they can only move 1 square, and they can only move straight ahead, right? Oh yeah, but they attack diagonally, right? I guess that, yeah, they're the only piece that does that, right? Oh, the bishop, well, yeah, because the bishop can move diagonally. Yeah, okay, but all the other ones attack by landing on. No, the queen and the king can do. Okay. What's that?
The queen and king, they can do everything.
Yes, that's true. Right. So okay. So how do these guys move? The rooks or the castles?
Vertically and horizontally.
Yeah, they can move any number of squares, but only in a straight line like that. What about the horsey guy? Yeah, they move. Yeah, two and 3, right? An L shape, 2 or 3 in some direction. This guy, the bishop or the elephant, diagonally, right? So they move diagonal squares. The king here, or whatever you want to call him. Any direction, but only 1 square. The queen, or whatever you'd like to call her. Anything but what? Oh yeah, she can't move like the horse, but she can move diagonally or straight ahead, any direction, any number of squares. Right. So yeah, that's kind of how you play the game, right? You've got a bunch of pieces and you move them on the board in the way that they're allowed to move, and you try to take or kill, however you want to say it, the pieces of the other person in an attempt to kind of corner their king. So what might an anthropologist say? Well, an anthropologist might look and say, well, this is obviously a model for society, right? The pieces are a model for society. We've got people who are higher up in government, like kings and queens or presidents and prime ministers. Then we have people who are a little bit lower, maybe knights or some sort of thing. And then we have the pawns, right? Or the soldiers, the little people like you and I, unless there's any royalty in the room. Royalty? No? Sophie, you're not royal? Okay. So we're all just regular common people. So these pieces are a model for society, and what happens in the game? Well, number one, it seems that the little people, it seems like we don't have a lot of options, do we? We just kind of march into war, and we can't really go a lot of directions. We can't really go we're just kind of, we just don't have a lot of options. We don't have a lot of movement in society. But the people who are higher up, do they have more options? Can they move around and do all kinds of different things? Yeah, right? So this kind of normalizes an idea that people at the top have more options and more ability to do things, whereas people at the bottom have less, right? We just kind of trudge along, going to our job every day, or going to the farmer's field, or whatever it is, right? Also, if we're playing this game, and we get in a position where, you know, you can move one way or the other. And so if you move one way, then you take one of my pawns, and if you move another way, let's say you take one of my knights, one of my horses. Which one would I really like you to take if you have to take one? Yeah, I want you to take the soldier. I don't want you to take my knight. Hope you probably would take my knight, but I hope you won't. So what does that say? Well, it seems like the lives of the regular people are not worth as much as the lives of and if you were playing this game, would you sacrifice a pawn to save your queen?
We sometimes use the soldiers as baits.
Yeah, and in fact, you could probably argue that that's all they are, right? They're meant to kind of create some sort of perimeter so you can move your higher ranking pieces closer to the king and corner him. So all these poor soldiers they're kind of collateral damage, right? They're expendable, they're disposable. They're there just so you can send them off to death while you try to maneuver your other pieces around the king, right? So this kind of devalues the lives of the soldiers, while it makes it seem like the lives of the kings and the queens are more important, right? And not only that, that you should sacrifice yourself for your king or for your queen. And if your king or your queen sacrifices you to save themselves, that's okay too, because that's valued, right? So all of these little things are kind of worked into the game in a way that is not, you know, people aren't thinking this when they're playing. When they're playing, they're just trying to enjoy the game and defeat their opponent, right? But all of these lessons and ideas are kind of encoded, and they're encoded in a way that when people play it, it makes sense, right? So imagine the culture that plays the football game and they finish the game when they feel the score is tied, right? Is a game like this going to make a lot of sense to those people? Not so much. They're going to keep trying to help their opponent, right? They're going to keep trying to like give them pieces or something to try to even out the score. Yeah, but that's not how the game is played, right? You're not trying to help your opponent. You're trying to kill them, right? You're trying to defeat them. So that's kind of what I'm saying, is that the game kind of resonates and makes sense with a culture if they've already learned some of those cultural values and ideas already. That's what kind of makes the game make sense. And by playing the game, it reinforces the lessons that they've already been taught, right? So it kind of works both ways. There's a lot of lessons and symbols that are encoded in here, and in some ways the game still works because some of those lessons and values continue to be held. So if we think about here, well, we don't have to think about here, but is winning still valued? Yeah, people like to win, in at least in Western culture. I can't speak for all of yours, but yeah, in the West, people like to win. Winning is important. Is strategy important? Yeah, being smart and strategic, that's valued as well. That's important. What do we think about warfare here in the West? It's certainly not the worst thing ever. There's lots of war movies. Some of our most popular movies are about war, Infinity War, right? So obviously war is not the most horrible thing, at least in our cultural imagination anyway. In real life, it might be a little bit different, but in how we think about it up here, we might think it's okay. So some of these kind of lessons continue to be taught, and so the game continues to resonate, right? The game continues to make sense. Does that make sense? In a way? Sort of? Huh?
Kind of.
Okay. Let me give you another example, but it's more of an anthropological example. Not that this isn't, but yeah. Let's go back to, let's go back to our friends, the Quake people, okay? So again, we just talked about them. They're an indigenous group from just a little bit up the coast here in BC. This is kind of a neat picture of them inside one of their big houses. And it's an old picture. It's probably like late 1800s when it was taken, maybe early 1900s. And what you can see, I'm not sure how clear that appears to you, but this is actually, it's a what? Kind of, yeah. It's a celebration, and often their celebrations and rituals would be held in the winter, because what the Quake do is, in the summer they kind of scatter out into smaller groups and they hunt and fish and live their lives separately. And in the winter they tend to come back and live in larger villages. So there's larger groups of people together in the winter. And so that's kind of when all the big ceremonies happen. If there's going to be a marriage, that's when marriages happen, because everyone's all together in the winter. And so this photo is probably taken at that point. And what you see here is in the front, in the foreground, if you will, you see a few people wearing these really big, long bird masks. And this is what this might be is a gathering of a secret society in Quake culture called the Cannibal Bird Society. And so a secret society, have you ever heard of secret societies before? Yeah? Maybe, probably the Illuminati is probably the most popular secret society that people talk about anyway. Whether or not it's a real thing is another question, but people talk about Illuminati. But in an anthropological sense, secret societies are just groups of people in a society that have kind of special religious knowledge or ceremonial knowledge, and they don't share it with everyone. Okay, so they're just kind of a separate group of people. They have their own rituals and their own gatherings and things, and the Cannibal Bird Society is one such group in Quake society. And so here, they might be doing their dances. They've got their masks. Likely, no one else would be able to wear a cannibal bird mask unless you were part of that society. But that's a right that you have. But what I'd like to do is describe to you a ceremony in which a young person, a new member, might be added into or inducted into the Cannibal Bird Society. Okay? So what I would like you to do is just imagine with me. Imagine with me, if you will. Okay, so we have one of these, space-time GPSs like Tony Stark invented in Avengers. Okay, so we all have one of those, and what we're going to do is we're going to go back in time in this part of the world. Let's say, well, we're gonna go back 1,000 years. Okay, so we're gonna go back in time 1,000 years. We're gonna go back to 1021 AD. So what's happening here at 1021 is that there are no Europeans here, right? Because Columbus is only going to discover the New World in 1492. So this is 500 years almost before any Europeans have been here. And it's just indigenous people living in this area. There's no roads, there's no cities, there's just people living in villages and communities, hunting and gathering and fishing and living their lives. Okay, so we're gonna back in time and we're gonna land in this period. And so what we might do is we might arrive at a Quake village, and let's just pretend that nobody challenges us. So of course they would be like, where did you weird people come from? But let's just pretend nobody does that. We might enter one of these Quake houses during the winter ceremonial, and we might see a very strange ritual. And so here's what we might see. So, what's that? The bird mask is? It is cool. If you're into the art of Indigenous people on the Northwest Coast, the Museum of Anthropology on the UBC campus, awesome. If it was not COVID, I would take us on a field trip there, but can't really do that now. So, but if you're interested in going on your own, very cool, very worth it. Okay, so we've gone back in time, and we come into the house, and maybe we like sit around the fire, just like some of these people are around the fire here, and you know, maybe a dance ends and it's just kind of quiet and people are chatting and talking, maybe eating as well a little bit. And then from the door in runs this young man, okay? He's totally naked. He's covered in mud, and he's got like twigs and leaves and mud in his hair, and he looks wild and he acts wild. So he's like running around on all fours. He's clawing at people and trying to bite them, and you know, snarling, acting like an animal, okay? And what's that? He's acting like he's not a wild man, but he's acting like a wild man. And so he's doing all this stuff, and so the people are like fighting him off and hitting him with sticks and things, and they drive him back out the door into the woods. Okay? So everybody settles down and goes back to their conversations and things. And then the same thing happens again. Again, this young man comes running in the door, wild, naked, covered in mud and leaves and things. And again, the people fight him off with twigs and branches and out the door into the woods, right? But maybe this time they leave a little bit of food for him, a little bit of human food, maybe some fish or berries, I don't know. What's that?
Maybe he's hungry.
Maybe who knows? He's biting at people, he seems to be hungry. And so after a little while, the young man kind of creeps forward and takes the food and disappears into the woods. Everybody goes back to their conversation. And again, the young man runs in, wild, crazy, clawing at people. Again, the people drive him back out the door, and maybe they leave something else for him, maybe like a blanket that he can cover himself with. And again, eventually the young man comes forward and takes the blanket. And then he comes in again, wild. But so this happens a few times, but every time he comes back into the house, he's a little less savage, he's a little less wild. And every time the people push him out, they leave a little thing that humans use or need, right? So maybe some shoes or some footwear, a blanket, some food, a hat, right? Something like that. And so eventually they keep doing this until eventually he comes in and he is calm. He's tamed and he sits down by the fire. And then at that time, the Cannibal Bird Society members will take him away and they'll have kind of a private dinner and they'll finish kind of bringing him into the Cannibal Bird Society. Now, for us who have just time traveled back and watched that, that's pretty weird, right? Yeah, that's a wild and crazy ritual, and probably not what most of us are used to when we think of ritual, right? We think of maybe prayers, or we think of songs or incense, or people walking around with things that, you know, cause smoke, or maybe bowing. Those are kind of the rituals that we're used to. But this is kind of a very strange occurrence to our eyes. And what I would argue to you is that it's, you know, it is strange, but part of the reason that it's strange is that we don't understand the symbols behind what's happening here. And the Quake people do. So here's how it makes sense. I said that a key symbol for the Quake people was hunger, right? This is a popular symbol in their culture, in their art, and in their stories. One of the reasons why has to do with the way that the Quake get their food or deal with their food, and I mentioned that earlier. I said that they were hunter-gatherers. They hunt, they gather, they fish, and they eat a lot of different things. So all kinds of land animals, fish, clams and mussels they might dig out of the shores here. Sometimes they hunt for seals. They'll have berries and nuts and things like that, mushrooms. But the way that they sort of work these things is that they try to collect as much food as they can during the summer months, the spring and the summer and the fall, because in the winter there's just not as much food available. And so they gather as much as they can, and then they dry it out and store it for the winter. And so in a lot of ways, the Quake people are kind of living out of their freezer for the winter, right? They're relying on the food that they've put away earlier in the year in order to get them through the winter. So hunger is really something that you might have to manage as a Quake person, right? If all you have to get you through the winter is your food stores, you don't want to pig out in January, right? Because if you pig out, you're gonna run out of food, and then you're gonna start to starve later on. So you have to be careful about how much food you eat sometimes. And sometimes you might be a little bit hungry, but you have to overcome that hunger, right? Because if you eat too much now, you won't have enough to last you until the spring. And so taming that hunger, managing that hunger, is an important part of their livelihood, right? If you just eat whatever you feel like eating, you are going to run out of food. So they have to manage this. And in a way, that's what's happening in this ritual. So there's a lot of text here, I know, but the hamatsa is the kind of young man that is being initiated into the society. But it says here that his hunger is fearsome, right? He's savage and wild and trying to eat and bite anything he can. But it's a symbol, right? His behavior is a symbol of the hunger that we all feel. And through the process of this ritual, the people are able to tame his hunger, right? They're able to calm him down and get him under control. And so in the same way, the Quake people can control their hunger as well, right? They can tame it. They can be in charge of it. And even more than that, there's another layer to that symbolism, because the hunger can also be thought of as all of the kind of maybe negative impulses that we have inside us, right? So maybe being jealous of other people, being selfish, being greedy, being uncooperative. All of those things are kind of negative impulses that we all feel from time to time and that we all have. But it's important that we learn to manage them and control them, right? Because if everyone in a community is acting selfish and greedy, will the community be able to thrive? No, right? Everyone will start fighting and they'll stop sharing, and it'll be chaos and awfulness, right? So not only do the Quake have to tame their hunger, but people in general have to tame all of these negative impulses inside them. And how do they do it? Well, they do it together, right? They do it as a group. They do it through practicing their rituals and their beliefs, and that's what allows them to keep those negative things inside, keep them from getting out and destroying the group. Just like they control their hunger, because if they let their hunger out, it will destroy their store of food and then they'll starve, right? Just like this young man who is savage and uncontrollable, but in the end proves to be that they can tame him, right? And they tame him together through community and through ritual, right? That's what this whole event, that's what this ritual means. That's what's being symbolized. And so again, when we don't know that, we time jump into this thing and we see this ritual and we think, holy cow, this is bananas, right? What's going on here? This naked guy running in and he's all dirty, and what's happening, right? But of course the Quake see a ritual like this and they're like, yeah, I get it. I know what's going on here. We're going to control this. We're going to tame this through group action, right? And so, again, we might parachute in here and think, wow, this is really quite bizarre. But again, when you understand the symbols and the stories behind it, then it makes sense, right? And the Quake people, of course, see this ritual and they think, yeah, I get this. I know what we're doing. And it reinforces those lessons that they've been taught, just like the chess game. This reinforces the power of social action, the power of ritual, the power of, being able to control those negative impulses inside you, even when sometimes they're quite powerful themselves, right? They're quite strong. You have the power to overcome them. We have the power to overcome them as a group if we stick together and if we practice our rituals, right? So again, there's a lot of symbolism here that's happening that we can understand if we know, right? If we know the meanings behind certain symbols and if we know some things about a culture, right? Does that make sense? Yeah? Do you have any questions about that? No? Let me see what my next slide is here. Oh, it's about football. Would you like to talk about football tomorrow? Okay. So that is, I guess, all I have for you today. Thank you for being here. You've been lovely. Have a good rest of the afternoon, and I will see you tomorrow for Friday. Yay, Friday. Okay, that's all. Online people, thank you for being here as well and for participating, and I'll see you all tomorrow.